The first development relates to the state of the evidence as at the 28th of September of 2020 regarding the engagement of private security to guard those in quarantine. It will be recalled that the former Chief Commissioner of Police, Mr Ashton, had given evidence that he had sent text messages to his federal police counterpart, Commissioner Kershaw, at 1:22 p.m. on 27 March, to the effect that he had advised that private security would be used, and some 10 minutes later, a further text to Commissioner Kershaw that he thought that, quote, the deal was set up by our DPC. Mr Ashton's further evidence was that earlier that day at 1:16 p.m, he had sent a text message to Mr Eccles, the then Secretary of the DPC, querying a suggestion that airport arrivals were to be guarded by police and seeking Mr Eccles' comment. Mr Ashton's evidence was that he didn't receive a text reply to that message and could not recall whether Mr Eccles or some other person telephoned him with the information regarding the use of private security that he had passed on to Commissioner Kershaw. In the wake of submissions received by some parties, further information was sought and obtained. As has now been well understood, a response was received particularly from the Department of Premier and Cabinet, which included details of phone records from Mr Eccles. Mr Eccles' telephone records show indeed he telephoned Mr Ashton at 1:17 p.m. on 27 March in a call that lasted 135 seconds. Having obtained this further information, the inquiry team requested certain parties to provide further answers on affidavits to questions directed to the issue of the decision to engage private security contractors in the hotel quarantine program and to provide further documents relating to that issue. Madam Chair, it should be emphasised at this point that the relevant parties who are being asked to address such questions are being asked to address novel material, not the subject of previous evidence. There is accordingly no basis for inferring or even speculating that any view has been formed about the veracity or otherwise of the evidence previously given by any parties on the topic of the engagement of private security. The material outstanding on this issue falls due variously from today's date up until the 23rd of October. The second development to which I referred concerns emails which have not previously been produced to the board. On the 15th of October, in response to a specific request from the board, solicitors acting for the Department of Health and Human Services provided 2 emails. These documents had not been previously produced to the board, despite there being served on the department notices to produce encompassing the breadth of the board's terms of reference. In the urgency of the moment, solicitors assisting you took the expedient course of issuing yet a further notice to produce, after which time the documents in question were produced. In the first instance, what has been produced is 2 emails which relate to 2 discrete issues. The first email concerns or constitutes a 6-page chain commencing on Monday the 30th of March 2020 at 5:23 p.m. and ending on Thursday the 2nd of July at 8:14 p.m. This chain of email concerns a discussion between numerous officials of the Department of Health and Human Services and starts in the first instance as a conversation concerning what smoking policies should be adopted for those in detention under Operation Soteria. Most significantly, the penultimate email in this chain is from Dr. Finn Romanis, the then Deputy Health Commander Planning, and is dated the 1st of April. It's addressed to a large number of DHHS officials. The subject heading of Dr. Romani's email is, quote, information, chain of command, people in detention. In its covering letter producing this and the next email to which I will shortly refer, DHHS's solicitors advised, in the context of a review of up to 500,000 documents, the enclosed documents were not considered relevant to a notice to produce and not critical as defined by the board. We also note the considerably tight timeframes of this inquiry, end quote. In the view of those assisting you, Madam Chair, this document on its face goes to matters which occupied a very considerable amount of the board's time, and you may consider it adds some weight in one direction or another to your deliberations as to who was in charge of the detention regime. For that reason, Madam Chair, I now tender that email, being a 6-page email chain commencing with an email dated 30 March 2020 at 5:23 p.m. from the Deputy Director Strategy and Policy at DHHS, and ending with an email from the State Controller Health dated Thursday 2 July 2020 at 8:14 p.m.
I'll mark that email chain as Exhibit 229 now, Mr. Neil. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Chair, a second email was also produced in response to the transaction I've just mentioned. That document consists of a 4-page email chain commencing on the 27th of March 2020 at 5:22 p.m. and finishing on Friday, 27 March 2020 at 6:46 p.m. The contents of this email chain concern a query from a Commonwealth official directed to the Chief Health Officer, raising a number of questions concerning arrangements in place in Victoria to implement the decision of National Cabinet to require overseas arrivals to self-isolate in hotels for 14 days. One of the 7 questions was what security arrangements were in place to ensure compliance with quarantine arrangements. The penultimate email in the chain is from Mr. Braden Hogan, Deputy Director Strategy and Policy at DHHS. In this penultimate email, he advises the Commonwealth officials, amongst other things, that, I quote, private security has been contracted to provide security at the hotels with escalation arrangements to VicPol as needed, end quote. Professor Sutton is included in copy to this penultimate email, and himself by a separate email acknowledges its receipt with the words, quote, thanks so much, Braden. On its face, this email has relevance to the time at which Professor Sutton had knowledge of the use of private security within the hotel program. His evidence before the inquiry that he was unaware of it until media reports concerning the outbreak of the Ridges Hotel in May of this year came to his attention. For that reason, Madam Chair, I also tender that email chain, being 4 pages, commencing with an email from a Senior Director of the Commonwealth COVID Task Force to Professor Sutton, dated the 27th of March at 17:22, and concluding with an email from Professor Sutton at 6:46 p.m. on that same date.
Exhibit 230.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, as a result of receiving those 2 emails in particular, those assisting you are in the process of seeking a response in the form of an affidavit from Professor Sutton to specific questions posed by the board and focusing on those emails. According to the statutory requirements, that response will be due some 7 days after it is served. It's expected that that will occur shortly. Madam Chair, an explanation was sought as to the non-production of those 2 emails in the form of a written request to the solicitors acting for DHHS. That response in the form of a letter dated the 19th of October arrived yesterday, and I consider it should also be formally tendered to you. For the sake of clarity then, Madam Chair, I tender firstly a 2-page letter dated 16 October 2020 from solicitors assisting to solicitors for DHHS.
Exhibit 231.
An 8-page letter dated 19 October 2020 from solicitors for the DHHS to solicitors assisting.
Exhibit 232.
Madam Chair, that letter from the solicitors for DHHS itself encloses 2 further emails, which for the sake of completeness I also wish to tender. The first of those, a 7-page email chain commencing with an email from the Deputy Director, Strategy and Policy at DHHS, dated Monday 30 March 2020 at 5:23 p.m, and concluding with an email from the same person dated 1 April 2020 at 20:07.
Exhibit 233.
Thank you. The second, a 6-page email chain commencing with an email from the Deputy Director, Strategy and Policy at DHHS, dated Monday 30 March 2020 at 5:23 p.m, and concluding with an email from Dr. Finn Romanes, 1950, on the same date.
Exhibit 234.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lastly, Madam Chair, I note that the letter from the solicitors for DHHS of the 19th of October also adverts at page 6 to, quote, 2 other emails in their possession. The board yesterday also requested production of these 2 emails. The board has received, and I tender now, those 2 emails. Firstly, a 2-page email exchange headed, quote, governance of mandatory detention implementation, unquote, being an email from Dr. Finn Romanes dated 31 March 2020 at 3:12 p.m, and an email from Ms. Merrin Bambit of the same date at 3:21 p.m.